Hello, this is going to be a status update on my north-facing camera. For a bit of context, the north-facing camera appeared to have a leak between the glass and the mount that the glass was in, which meant that every time it rained, moisture would get inside the camera. The part that seemed to get the coldest and seemed to attract all of the moisture was the front-facing glass, and there are a lot of days after a rainstorm with reasonably unusable footage because of the moisture that happened to be collecting on the inside of the glass. I had the camera set up not even a month and the infrared transmitter light burned out, and this is what it was last year, and this is what it looked like before it burned out. I was debating whether or not I should take it back to the store. When I bought the cameras, they only had 3 in stock, and one of them busted its focus ring as I was trying to set it up, and it was completely out of focus. So I returned it to the store the next day in exchange for the third one. And the third one became the south-facing camera. That one had a busted focus ring out of the box. I did not feel like returning it to the store, so I just took it apart and manually aligned it as best as I could. When the infrared transmitter stopped working, I didn't feel like taking it back to the store. I suspected that the store did not want to carry that model anymore because they are extremely cheap. Did I say they were cheap before? And as a result, I would no longer have a camera. Even without the infrared transmitter, it was still working, although I really couldn't see much of anything. But I did see a couple of stars along the way, and that was ultimately the goal for that camera, so I left it as it was. Everything was working relatively fine. I was collecting video frames for the duration, and some days I didn't have much to look at, and other days I had stars that I could see along the way. So here you can see the North Stars over here. Everything was going fairly well for over a year. I did notice that at some point last summer or last autumn, somewhere around here, the camera decided it was going to have a really hard time being able to see at night. Sometimes it wasn't so bad, sometimes it was really dark, and so it seemed to me that the camera was deteriorating in functionality. I made a video where I was reviewing the north-facing camera footage, and there was an evening when my neighbor would turn on their front porch light and it would illuminate a little bit of the tree here, and whenever the tree was illuminated, the camera switched modes and it was able to see the stars a lot better. And so that got me thinking about the camera's ability to detect the light, contrast, etc., and whether or not it was trying to detect whether or not to be in daytime mode or nighttime mode. So one evening I got a fairly dim light. I shone it on the soffit of my porch overhang that you see here, and it would illuminate a little bit of this area here, enough to give the camera something to see. And I noticed that whenever I did that, it would switch modes and it would see the stars a lot better. So I took the north-facing camera out of service for a day, took it in the house, and decided I was going to repair the infrared transmitter board. As I had suspected, the moisture had gotten in, and because the transmitter board was right up against the glass, this board also got quite cold, and the moisture would condense on the back side of the board here, and it had corroded the solder joints for this resistor here, and it also did a little bit of damage elsewhere. But when I put my meter between here and here, I got nothing. But when I put it tight against this side of the resistor, I was able to get a reading. So I knew that there was a bad solder connection. I wasn't able to do a very good repair. I heated each of these sides up and I scraped it down as best as I could, and I put some more solder on it, and it did seem to work. I put it back together and it worked for a total of about 2 minutes, and then it died again. So the next day I took the board out again. I lifted it completely. I replaced it with a couple of resistors from my kit. The original was a 2.2 ohm resistor, and I only had 1.5s and 3s. I decided to use 1.5s to dissipate the heat a little bit better. When I did repair it and put it on my bench power supply, I noticed that it was drawing 460 milliamps, which would probably go through these resistors. So I'm probably pushing these resistors past their rating slightly, but it has been holding up for a couple of weeks. That gave me a chance to analyze the images that I was seeing and to form a few opinions as to why the camera was having a hard time as of last August thereabouts. The transmitter board is self-contained. You give it a 12 volt and a ground power supply. This is a light sensor, and when it detects that the light is too low, it applies power to all of the infrared LEDs. My theory that I would have to confirm is that the transmitter board will provide a signal back through the CDS line back to the camera to let the camera know when this board has detected low light level. I have a suspicion that one of these other components has also suffered some form of corrosive damage that is preventing the signal from getting back to the camera. So now the camera is entirely blind as to when it's day or night. It has to gauge the amount of light solely based on the image that it sees. I hinted at this in my last video. The camera switches to black and white mode for night, and it provides color images for the day. The camera has two different modes. It's got a daytime mode and a nighttime mode. The default is to automatically detect and switch between the two modes, but when it detects that it is supposed to be at night, it uses different settings than during the day. Here you can see when I crank the contrast and the brightness all the way up, you can see that the image is still black and white. But if I go ahead a little bit, you'll see that now the image has a tinge of purple to it. This is at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's pitch dark out. The camera can't see anything. It thinks that it's daytime because it doesn't have that sensor feedback from that CDS sensor. It's not able to detect enough in the image, and it seems to default during the day. As you can see, it is able to see a couple of stars, but they're not nearly as bright as it is when the thing flips into nighttime mode like this one. When the camera believes that it is in nighttime mode and it changes its settings accordingly, then the stars really pop out. So around March 25th, this is when I had repaired the transmitter board. And while I was at it, in the process of doing that initially, I had bumped the focus ring ever so slightly, instantly got it out of alignment, and in the process of resetting the alignment, I also readjusted it, so now I'm zoomed out a little bit. So now you can see a little bit more of this and a bit more of the tree. So now I can see a few more stars as they cross this line over here. Unfortunately, when I took the camera apart, I also decided I was going to try to seal up the housing a little bit better. For context, here is the camera in question, and you can't see too well in this image, but there's a plastic ring right here that goes inside and provides a light barrier between the camera lens and this transmitter board here. Here's that sensor, by the way. So while I was repairing the board, since I had the front glass ring off, I had laid it down with the inside facing up, and I thought I would try to run a bead of crazy glue along the outside edge here and along the inside edge over here of the outer glass, being very careful not to put any in here, because if I got any crazy glue on the inside here, then I would not be able to get it off. After all the repairs were done and I went to put it back together, even though it was maybe an hour later, the crazy glue still had not set, and at that point it was starting to leak and creep along the glass when I put it back together, and so the entire outer ring had a bit of a haze to it. But despite that, the inside was still relatively clear. I did notice that over the years, the moisture brought in all kinds of stuff from the inside, and it coated the inside of the glass with dust and other things. So I very foolishly tried to wipe it clean and ended up making some streak marks of grease and other stuff. And adjusting the contrast, you can see all of the smudging that's on the glass is reflecting the light coming off of the house. And so it looks like I'm kind of like looking it looks like I'm kind of looking through a cloud. A few nights ago, I tried to clean the glass with rubbing alcohol, and all I did was I managed to push that grease around and get a slightly different pattern. It did help, but not by a whole lot. Last night I took it off again and I really cleaned it very well with some Windex. And now there's just a tiny little bit of reflections off the glass, but I think at this point I can live with it. So that's going to be it for the moment. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in another video soon enough. Bye for now.